A billionaire protector, Arthur Vance, returned from a 3-week business trip only to be paralyzed by the sight of a little black boy sleeping in the frigid darkness of his own garage. The boy was curled on a pile of dusty rags, his small frame shivering in the concrete chill, a stark and desolate island in a sea of polished chrome and luxury vehicles. He looked at the child, no older than 5, and then at the pristine, climate-controlled mansion looming just beyond the connecting door. A fortress of warmth and comfort the boy was clearly denied. Why would a child be caged like an animal in his own mother's house? And who truly deserves to be brought into the light? The silence of the estate was the first thing that had unsettled him. Arthur, a man who had built an empire on calculated logic and the precise prediction of market fluctuations, always trusted his gut. His instincts, honed in the deserts of a war he no longer spoke of, were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. His new wife, Isabella, was supposed to greet him. Her texts had been effusive, filled with heart emojis and breathless anticipation of his return. Yet the sprawling mansion was still, its opulent halls echoing with an unnatural quiet. He'd called her name, his voice absorbed by the cavernous marble foyer. No answer. Assuming she was running a last-minute errand, he decided to retrieve a set of vintage woodworking tools from the garage's back storage unit, a nostalgic impulse to connect with a simpler time. He punched the code, and the heavy door hissed open. The scent of cold concrete, expensive leather, and gasoline filled his nostrils. His collection of cars, a silver Aston Martin, a black Ferrari, a custom-built Bentley, sat gleaming under the recessed lighting like sleeping predators. Everything was in its place, obsessively clean, a hallmark of Isabella's meticulous management of their home. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows of the far corner, near a small, unmarked utility door he hadn't opened in years. He walked towards it, his expensive leather shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the polished floor. He pushed the door. It was unlocked. And there he was. The boy couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds. His clothes were thin and frayed, a t-shirt with a faded cartoon character and pants that were too short, exposing bony ankles. His cheek was pressed against a greasy burlap sack, his small chest rising and falling in shallow, troubled breaths. A half-eaten, stale piece of bread lay near his hand. Arthur stopped, his heart clenched. The world around him dissolved into a roaring silence. For a dizzying 3 seconds, the boy on the floor wasn't a stranger. He was a ghost. He was the ghost of his own son, another little boy named Leo, lost to a fever years ago, a tragedy that had hollowed out his life and left him a walking vault of grief. The same dark curls, the same delicate line of his jaw. The sight didn't just break his heart. It shattered the carefully constructed armor he had worn for a decade. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, then another and another. Arthur Vance, the titan of industry, the unshakable ex-soldier, stood in the cold silence of his garage and wept for the son he had lost and the boy he had just found. He knelt, the motion slow and reverent, as if approaching a frightened deer. He reached out a hand, then stopped himself, pulling it back. He couldn't startle him. Instead, he simply watched him breathe, the raw, protective instinct that had been dormant for so long roaring back to life with the force of a flash flood. This was not just a child in need. It was a sacred duty. In that cold, forgotten corner, amidst the scent of oil and dust, Arthur Vance made a quiet, unbreakable vow. He would protect this child. He would find out who had put him here, in this heartless cage, and he would bring the walls of their world crashing down around them. He didn't know the boy's name, his story, or the darkness that had led him to this place, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this boy's suffering would end tonight. He waited for the child to stir on his own. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the boy's eyes fluttered open. They were large and brown, and when they focused on Arthur, they filled with a pure, primal terror. The boy scrambled backward, pressing himself into the corner, his small body trembling violently. He didn't make a sound, not a cry or a whimper. It was a silence that spoke of a fear so profound that voice had been stolen by it. "It's okay," Arthur said, his voice softer than he'd used in years. "I'm not going to hurt you." He held his hands up, palms open, a universal sign of peace he'd learned long ago. The boy just stared, his chest heaving. Just then, the purr of an engine echoed from the driveway. Headlights swept across the garage windows. Isabella was home. Arthur carefully stood, never taking his eyes off the terrified child. "Stay here for one moment," he whispered. "You are safe now." He walked out of the storage room, closing the door gently behind him, and met his wife as she stepped out of her white convertible, laden with shopping bags from high-end boutiques. She was beautiful, radiant, her smile a practiced masterpiece of warmth and affection. "Darling, you're home early," she exclaimed, dropping her bags to rush into his arms. "I was just picking up a few things for the gala." "Oh, I missed you so much." Her perfume was a cloud of expensive florals, a jarring contrast to the scent of neglect that clung to the air behind him. He held her at arm's length, his face an unreadable mask of calm. "Isabella, there is a child in the garage." Her smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and calculating passed through her eyes before being instantly suppressed. It was a micro-expression of panic, so quick he might have missed it if he weren't looking for it. "Oh my goodness, you found him," she said, her voice a pitch-perfect performance of relieved concern. "That poor boy. It's a dreadful situation." She launched into a story, smooth and plausible. "The boy," she explained, "was the son of a new maid she'd had to dismiss just yesterday for stealing. The woman had a substance abuse problem, had abandoned the boy on their doorstep that very morning, and Isabella, in her boundless compassion, had taken him in. I've already called Child Protective Services," she said, placing a gentle hand on Arthur's chest. "They're so backed up. They said they couldn't get here until tomorrow. I didn't want to frighten him by bringing him into the big house. He's so feral. I thought the guest room above the garage was the quietest place for him. He must have wandered down here." Her explanation was seamless, every detail designed to paint her as a saint. But Arthur saw the lie. The guest room above the garage was a fully furnished apartment. The storage closet was a concrete box. And the boy's terror was not the result of a single day of confusion. It was the ingrained fear of a long-term victim. He nodded slowly, playing along. "Of course. You did the right thing inside." A cold, hard rage began to crystallize. The investigation had begun. Arthur insisted on bringing the boy into the main house. Isabella protested lightly, suggesting it would be too overwhelming for the child, but Arthur was immovable. He went back to the storage room and found the boy still huddled in the corner. "Come with me," he said gently, extending a hand. The boy flinched but didn't run. Arthur waited patiently until, after a long moment, the child tentatively placed a small, grimy hand into his, felt as fragile as a bird's wing. He led him out of the garage and into the dazzling opulence of the mansion. The boy's eyes widened, taking in the soaring ceilings, the grand staircase, the gleaming chandeliers. He walked on the plush Persian rugs as if he were walking on eggshells. Arthur took him directly to one of the lavish guest suites, a room larger than most apartments, overlooking the manicured gardens. He ran a warm bath for the boy, who watched the tub fill with a mixture of fear and fascination. Arthur left him with a set of soft pajamas and a fluffy towel, giving him privacy but staying just outside the door. He heard the splash of water, but no sounds of play, just a functional silence. When the boy emerged, clean and wrapped in a robe that swallowed him whole, he looked even smaller, more vulnerable. Arthur had the kitchen staff prepare a simple, nourishing meal: chicken soup, bread, and a glass of milk. He set it on a small table in the suite. The boy stared at the food, then looked at Arthur, a question in his eyes. "It's for you," Arthur said. "You can eat it all." The boy ate with a desperate, frantic energy, clutching the bread as if afraid it would be snatched away. He didn't use the spoon for the soup, instead lifting the bowl to his lips and drinking it down. When he was finished, he tried to hide a piece of bread in the pocket of the robe. Arthur's heart ached. This was the behavior of a child accustomed to chronic hunger. Later, while the boy slept soundly for the first time in what was likely a very long time, tucked into a vast bed with a mountain of soft pillows, Arthur began his work. He retreated to his home office, a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, and made his first call. It was to Marcus Thorne, his head of security and the only man he trusted implicitly. Marcus was a former intelligence officer, a quiet professional who could find out anything about anyone. "Marcus," Arthur began, his voice low and intense. "I have a situation here. It's a personal matter. I need a complete, covert background check on my wife, Isabella." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Consider it done, Arthur," Marcus replied, no questions asked. "And I need you to find any record of a maid recently hired and fired from the estate. Specifically one with a young son." His second call was to the estate's head gardener, a man named George Henderson who had worked for Arthur's family for over 30 years. "George, it's Arthur Vance. I need to ask you a few questions. In person. Meet me by the old oak tree at the edge of the property in 10 minutes. Come alone." George Henderson was a man whose face was a roadmap of sun and worry. He twisted his worn leather gloves in his hands, his gaze darting nervously towards the lit windows of the main house. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice raspy, "I don't want no trouble." "There won't be any trouble for you, George. I give you my word," Arthur assured him. "I just need the truth. There's a little boy in the house. My wife tells me he just arrived this morning." George's eyes fell to the ground. He kicked at a loose stone. "That ain't true, sir," he mumbled. "I first saw the little fella. Must have been 3, maybe 4 weeks ago." Arthur's blood ran cold. "Tell me everything you've seen." The gardener's story tumbled out in a reluctant torrent. He'd seen Isabella with the boy only a few times. She'd bring him out to the edge of the yard, always when she thought no one was watching. He'd heard her yelling at him, her voice a venomous hiss that was nothing like the sugary sweetness she used in public. He'd seen her lock the boy in the garage for hours at a time. "I wanted to say something, sir. I swear I did," George said, his voice thick with shame. "But she said he was a difficult relative's child she was looking after. She told me he was prone to violent outbursts and had to be kept isolated for his own safety. And she made it clear I'd lose my job, my pension, everything, if I interfered." Arthur placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "You did the right thing by telling me now, George." "Thank you." He returned to the house, his rage now a white-hot, focused beam. Isabella's lie wasn't just a simple deception. It was a carefully constructed fortress of deceit. The next morning, Marcus delivered his initial report. It was devastating. There was no record of any new maid being hired or fired in the last 6 months. More importantly, Marcus had discovered Isabella's secret. Before marrying Arthur, she had been a registered foster parent. And according to state records, a 5-year-old boy named Leo was placed in her care 2 months ago. She had never mentioned this. Not once. She had moved the child into Arthur's home under the cover of darkness and secrecy. The monthly stipend from the state, a significant sum, was being deposited into a private bank account Arthur didn't know existed. The motive became sickeningly clear. She was using a vulnerable child as a source of hidden income, while subjecting him to unimaginable cruelty and neglect, all under the roof of a man she pretended to love. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. His next-door neighbor, a quiet widow named Eleanor Gable, had called him. She'd seen the news of his return and had been wrestling with her conscience. "Arthur, I am so sorry to intrude," she began, her voice trembling slightly over the phone. "But I have security cameras that overlook your side yard. I've seen things. Your wife, with that little boy. It hasn't felt right." Arthur went to her home immediately. Mrs. Gable showed him the footage. It was gut-wrenching. There was Isabella, dragging Leo by the arm, throwing a piece of bread on the ground for him as if he were a dog. There were hours of footage of the garage door, with Leo never once emerging. But the worst part was the audio. The high-end cameras had powerful microphones. Arthur listened, his fists clenching, as his wife's voice, stripped of all its charm, cut through the air like a razor. "You are nothing," she sneered at the crying child in one clip. "No one wants you. No one will ever even know you're here. If you make a sound, I will lock you in that room and you will never see the sun again." He had it all. The witness testimony, the financial records, the video and audio evidence. It was a complete and damning portrait of a monster hiding in plain sight. He met with his lawyer, a formidable woman named Elena Ramirez, and Marcus. They sat in Arthur's study, the evidence laid out on the grand mahogany desk. Elena's face was grim. "This is beyond a divorce, Arthur. These are criminal charges. Child endangerment, fraud, aggravated abuse. We can end this quietly, or we can make a statement." Arthur looked out the window, towards the guest suite where Leo was now sitting with a sketchpad and crayons, tentatively drawing a wobbly-looking dog. He was still silent, but a little of the terror had receded from his eyes. A quiet end was not enough. Isabella couldn't be allowed to simply disappear with a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, free to harm another child somewhere else. Her wickedness had flourished in the dark. It needed to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the brightest light possible. "She's hosting the annual Children's Foundation Gala here in 2 days," Arthur said, his voice dangerously calm. "She will be on a stage, in front of 200 of the city's most influential people, talking about her dedication to helping vulnerable children. That's where we'll do it. I want her stripped of her disguise in front of the entire world." The next 2 days were a masterclass in deception. Arthur played the part of the doting husband, discussing gala arrangements with Isabella, complimenting her dress, allowing her to believe she was in complete control. She seemed to relax, convinced her lies had held. She cooed over Leo in Arthur's presence, offering him toys he was too afraid to touch, a pantomime of affection that made Arthur's stomach turn. She explained the boy's silence as part of his trauma from his mother, a story she was now brazenly embellishing. She was preparing for her greatest performance, unaware that the stage was being set not for her triumph, but for her utter annihilation. Arthur, meanwhile, moved his own pieces into place. Marcus coordinated with the local police department and child protective services. Elena prepared a concise, irrefutable presentation of the evidence. They were ready. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom of the Vance estate was a glittering spectacle of wealth and influence. Crystal glasses clinked, a string quartet played softly, and the air hummed with the conversation of the city's elite. Isabella was the star of the evening, gliding through the crowd in a stunning emerald gown, her laughter bright and effortless. She was the perfect hostess, the perfect philanthropist, the perfect wife. She finally took the stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. A massive screen behind her displayed the logo of the Children's Foundation. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "There is no calling more noble, no duty more sacred, than protecting the innocent. Every child deserves a voice. Every child deserves to be safe." As she spoke, Arthur walked calmly from the side of the room and up the steps to the stage. He moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose that drew every eye in the room. Isabella's smile faltered for a second. "Darling," she said, trying to laugh it off. "I wasn't expecting a co-host." "I'm not here to co-host," Arthur said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight that silenced the room. "I'm here to talk about the truth." He looked at the audiovisual technician at the back of the room, a man Marcus had replaced with one of his own, and gave a slight nod. Suddenly, the sound of Isabella's voice filled the ballroom, but it wasn't the warm, melodic tone they had just been hearing. It was the harsh, cruel hiss from Mrs. Gable's security camera. "You are nothing. No one wants you. If you make a sound, I will lock you in that room and you will never see the sun again." A collective gasp swept through the audience. Isabella's face went white. "What is this? This is fake. It's a trick," she stammered. But then the video footage began to play on the giant screen behind her. The guests watched in horror at the images of her dragging the small boy, of her throwing his food on the ground, of her screaming in his face. Arthur's voice cut through the stunned silence. "This is Leo," he said, as a picture of the boy appeared on screen. "For the last 4 weeks, he has been a prisoner in this house. He slept on rags in a concrete storage closet while my wife collected thousands of dollars from the state to care for him." He clicked a remote, and the screen displayed copies of her hidden bank statements, the deposits from the foster care system highlighted in red. "She told me his mother had abandoned him here 2 days ago. That was a lie. She told me she was keeping him safe. That was a lie." Isabella stared out at the sea of horrified, accusing faces. Her mask of perfection was not just cracked. It had been utterly vaporized. Her whole body began to tremble, her carefully constructed world imploding in real time. "He's a monster. A difficult, horrible child," she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. "He deserved it. He's worthless." The pathetic, rage-filled confession hung in the air, a final, damning indictment from her own lips. At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers and a plain-clothed social worker, who had been waiting discreetly at the back, began to walk purposefully through the parted crowd. The sight of them broke her completely. Isabella crumpled to the stage, a sobbing, defeated wreck. The illusion was over. Justice, swift and absolute, had arrived. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Isabella was arrested on the spot, her public humiliation complete. The story became a media sensation, a shocking tale of high society hypocrisy and monstrous cruelty. Arthur shielded Leo from all of it, retreating with him to a quiet, secluded property on the coast, far from the prying eyes of the world. The legal proceedings were swift. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, Isabella was convicted on all charges and sentenced to a long prison term, her name forever synonymous with disgrace. Arthur, with the help of Elena, immediately filed for and was granted permanent custody of Leo. The cold, opulent mansion was sold, its contents liquidated, every trace of Isabella's presence erased from their lives. Their new home was a cottage by the sea, filled with warm light, the scent of salt air, and the sound of crashing waves. It was a house built for comfort, not for show. In the safety and unwavering patience of Arthur's care, Leo slowly began to heal. The transformation was miraculous. The silent, terrified boy who hoarded bread began to emerge from his shell. It started with small things, a shared smile over a book, a willingness to hold Arthur's hand on a walk along the beach. Then, one afternoon, as they were building a sandcastle, a seagull swooped down and stole a cracker from their blanket. Leo pointed, and a sound came from his lips, a small, bubbling, beautiful laugh. It was the first time Arthur had ever heard it, and it was the most magnificent sound in the world. A few months later, Leo came to him holding a piece of paper. It was a drawing, rendered in bright, happy crayon. It depicted 2 figures. One was a very tall man, the other a small boy. They were holding hands in front of a little house with a smoking chimney, under a giant, smiling yellow sun. He pointed to the tall figure. "Arthur," he said, his voice soft but clear. Then he pointed to the small figure. Leo, he had finally reclaimed his own name. Arthur knelt and pulled the boy into a gentle hug, his heart overflowing with a love and peace he thought he had lost forever. He was no longer just a protector, he was a father. The ghost of his past had been laid to rest by the promise of a new future. For it is a profound truth that the most monstrous evils often wear the most beautiful masks, flourishing in the silent acquiescence of those who look away. But it is an even greater truth that the quiet strength of a single, compassionate soul can be enough to tear that mask away and expose the darkness to the cleansing light. True strength is not found in dominance or deception, but in the unwavering resolve to protect the voiceless and to offer sanctuary to the broken. How many silent victims are waiting for someone to simply notice? And what power do we each hold to be the one who finally listens? We hope this story has moved you and served as a reminder of the quiet heroes who walk among us. If you have a story about an act of kindness or protection that changed a life, we would be honored to hear it in the comments below. Thank you for reading, and may we all strive to be a light in someone